making money, saving money, investing money. I think way too often the conversation around personal finance is that it's easy if you just stick to a few logical fundamentals. But here's the thing. We aren't necessarily logical by nature when it comes to money. Our brains aren't always wired to make the best financial decisions. In this video, I want to talk about 5 common biases that influence how we perceive and handle money. By being aware of them, you'll be less likely to fall for the mental traps that are costing you some serious cash. Let's get started. The bias of herd mentality. This is the tendency to follow a crowd without questioning their decision. In other words, we are individually influenced by the majority's choices that are made through a decision-making process we aren't always privy to. Whether it's jumping on the latest investment trend or succumbing to the social pressure to overspend on the latest iPhone, herd mentality can quickly lead us off whatever financial plan we have in place. That goes for your monthly budget, your dollar cost averaging index funds, your savings goals, etc. We see herding behavior a lot more than you may think. It's actually one of the main contributors to both bubbles and rapid sell-offs in which investors' decisions become detached from the fundamentals and are instead driven by what the majority are doing. And it makes total sense why this happens. As humans, we definitely don't want to be left behind by others, and we naturally seek some form of leadership or direction when feeling like we don't have all of the tools and information to make a decision. But just because everyone else is doing something doesn't mean it's the right choice for us. By stepping back, anytime you see a crowd, quote unquote, making financial moves, and critically evaluating our decisions, we can avoid blindly following the herd and make choices that align with our personal finances. Let's talk about present bias, because I want the marshmallow now. Present bias is our tendency to prioritize immediate rewards over future payoffs, even if those future payoffs are substantially more. This is directly tied to instant gratification as it pertains to using our present dollars. Think about the trade-off between buying the latest model of your favorite car and saving for retirement. Present bias suggests that you will feel more satisfaction from the car you can drive today than the prospect of the long-term gains you won't get until your 60s. Present bias is particularly harmful to our personal finance goals because financial well-being is inherently a long-term process that benefits us most in the future. Building wealth requires you to delay that instant gratification and reprioritize your future self over today. It's totally fine to go out and enjoy yourself. It's fine to buy nice things and go on trips. But when you find yourself consistently opting for the immediate reward, rather than making those necessary financial sacrifices, you're losing massive payoffs in the future. So just keep present bias in mind when thinking about making that next big purchase you may not really need. Find comfort in knowing that good financial decisions today will make you much better off tomorrow. Loss aversion, the tendency to prefer avoiding losses over acquiring equivalent gains, which is just saying the pain of losing 100 feels much more intense than the joy of gaining 100. And this aversion to loss turns us stagnant in our financial decisions. Loss aversion is why we like holding on to investments that are clearly going nowhere but down, instead of realizing the loss and moving on. It's also why some people avoid any level of risk, even if the rewards are worth said risk, all because they fear that potential loss. The fundamental problem with extreme loss aversion is that it leads us to miss out on opportunities to make money and build wealth. In finance, you have to remember that reward and risk are forever tied together. The greater the potential reward, the greater the risk, and vice versa. With that said, loss aversion impacts our investing strategies by prioritizing some perceived safety over potential growth. But because we weigh losses more than equal gains, that strategy lacks balance. Understanding this bias is crucial for developing a balanced approach to risk-taking, strategically looking for financial opportunity. The bottom line is, fear of loss leads to emotional investing, which is a very common mistake most investors ought to avoid. By recognizing that losses are a natural part of investing, we can focus less on fear and more on a long-term financial plan. We can focus on rational decision-making based on factual evidence rather than irrational emotion. Confirmation bias, something every single person on this planet is guilty of, including myself. This is when we seek out information that confirms our existing beliefs while ignoring evidence that contradicts them. In essence, cherry picking. Let's say you're looking into a single stock position that you already believe is a good investment, and you come across an article praising the company for its growth potential. Instead of continuing your research to fully assess the company, you take this article as the single source of truth, because it confirms what you already know. The stock is awesome. Even if the article does provide reliable information, chances are it does not thoroughly paint the full picture. To form an objective opinion on the company, you would need to dive deeper into the argument against it. The risks, the competitive barriers, the potential poor financials. When doing research or formulating an opinion, keep in mind this tendency to gravitate to information that supports our existing beliefs. Be aware that we will even subconsciously turn a blind eye to information contrary to our beliefs. So by understanding confirmation bias, we can work towards objectivity and make more informed financial decisions. In Mark Twain's words, "What gets us into trouble is not what we don't know, it's what we know for sure that just ain't so." Let's talk about anchoring bias. This is defined as the tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information we receive when making decisions. The first piece becomes an anchor of comparison for all future pieces of information. This skews our perception of value, risk, and truth. Think of it as being anchored to a particular price point when out shopping. Let's say for a new laptop. Your budget is loosely $500, but the very first laptop you see is a MacBook priced at $1,500. As you continue to shop, you find an older model on sale for $1,200. You think you scored big time. Relative to $1,500, it seems like a steal. But both laptops are way more expensive than other options on the market and way beyond your $500 budget. Because of anchoring bias, you're really likely to stretch yourself thin and purchase the $1,200 laptop. Because how could you turn down that value? By anchoring our perception to the initial price point of a product or a service or an asset, we may end up overspending without even realizing it. Our perception of value is skewed towards the higher end. And I suppose the same can be said about the opposite, in which we refuse to buy quality items because they seem too expensive. Anchoring bias influences a ton of different financial aspects. So being aware of it allows us to take a step back and critically evaluate a spectrum of information, rather than blindly accepting the first piece of it we encounter. And that's our 5 common biases that affect our perception of money. Now, these were just brief overviews of each bias. There is extensive research, experiments, and real-world examples of these biases out there. In fact, the study of behavioral economics is rooted in many of these phenomena. I highly recommend you do some research of your own and look into the experiments that have been done to showcase when, where, how, and why these biases exist in an economic setting. A famous example is the Stanford marshmallow experiment. I'm sure most of us are familiar with the work, but it is all super fascinating stuff. Anyways, 5 common biases that influence the way we think about money: herd mentality, present bias, loss aversion, confirmation bias, and anchoring bias. Understand how each affects your thinking, and you'll become a much better decision maker on your road to improve your personal finances and build wealth. As always, thanks for watching. Until next time, take care of yourself, and best of luck.